Hello and welcome to the first episode of A Beginner's Guide to Toonboom Harmony. I'm Vincent. I've been a professional animator working on TV cartoons for more than a year and a professional Toonboom Harmony teacher for several months now. I'll be showing you how to use the software efficiently for personal and professional projects. I'll try to make this series as accessible as can be so that even if you have little to no knowledge of animation or animation softwares in general, you should be able to pick it up and produce some animation yourself. Note that it doesn't mean I won't go in depth with some tools and techniques. So, first things first. What exactly is Toonboom Harmony? To put it simply, imagine Adobe Flash or Animate, except it's on steroid and took some very useful features from TV Paint and After Effects. In other words, it's a pretty well-made and extremely versatile animation software that can handle both vectors and bitmaps. What can we make with Toonboom Harmony?
The most sophisticated and respected art form in the universe!
Now that we've got that covered, let's boot it up and see the first important settings we've got to look at before opening a scene. So here we have our welcome screen. It's overall pretty self-explanatory. Here you have the options to create a scene, here to open a scene, and here some links to some help from the official website. Right now we'll be looking at this over here. So, the name, it's going to be the name of your scene, obviously. The location, it's where you're going to save your scene. Camera size, it's a preset that gives you, amongst other, different values for those three parameters here, which are going to be the most important. You can ignore field of view, it's not really important. By default, it's HDTV 1080p 24. It means that it's a format that is in 1080 by 1920, which is a standard for full HD. It's measured in pixels, and it's at a frame rate of 24 frames per second. It's a standard in animation and in filmmaking in general. You have several presets that are, for most of them, really good. By default, I use HDTV 1080p 25. There's really no big difference between the two. And if you want to create your own, you can go in here and you have this window that opens, where you can manually change some values for the size of your scene, for the field of view, although it's not really important, and for the frame rate. By default, you're always going to use either 24 frames per second or 25 frames per second. It's a standard for animation. If you go higher, it starts to look a bit weird. Animation for TV is not the same as animation for video game, but if you want, you can here take your frame rate up to 60 frames per second, but I would only recommend going this far if you were going to work on animations for video games. As for the size, the highest we can go is 8K. I think it's a bit overkill personally, because when you're working in 2D, Full HD is plenty enough. But if you really need to work in 4K or 8K, you have those two presets here, 4K UHD and 8K UHD. And as we can see, when I select one or the other, it's by default in 4K size and at a frame rate of 24. So I'll use the by default HDTV 1080p 25. You can use any format you want, but I just recommend working with that or with 24 frames per second. There's really no difference, no noticeable difference between the two. So once we've got this done, you can click on Create a Scene. And here we are in our newly created scene. You should be able to see something very close to what I have here, minus some minor details here and there, but it's mostly things I'll go over as I talk about the software later in this series. First things first, we're going to look at the major windows we're going to use while animating. The most important, of course, is going to be the camera view. It's this one in the center. It's where you're going to draw. By the way, you by default should have a brush tool selected and you should already be able to draw a bit in there. This is where you're going to animate either in frame by frame or in puppets. And this is where you're going to see what is rendered. That's why this window is so important. Second, we're going to have the timeline. The timeline is right there on the bottom. It has two purposes. First, it's where you're going to stack your layers. If I create layers, they stack on top of each other here, like many other softwares. Some of you might recognize something pretty close to Flash or After Effects. And like in Flash or After Effects, this is where you're going to go forward and backwards in time, using this little red cursor here. Again, that's something I'll go much deeper into later in this series. We also have the Tool Properties windows right there. This is where you're going to have all the properties of your currently selected tool. And speaking of selecting tools, you're going to have to use also a lot the left toolbar here. It's where you have your most important tools when it comes to either drawing, selecting, animating, filling in colors. It's your all-purpose toolbar that you have in any other softwares, except it has some tools that are exclusive to Harmony. Again, something I'll cover much more in depth later. Then we have the color tab here. This is where you're going to create your palette. It's a bit different between vectors and bitmaps. And this is basically all it's meant to do. One last thing that you need to see is the node view. The node view is something I will show much later as I go on, but it's a really important concept in Toonboom Harmony, and it's an extremely powerful tool, and it's the principal reason why Harmony Premium, at least, is such a good and powerful tool. Basically, if you want just the Cliff Notes version of it, it's your layers. As you can see, the 5 layers I have stacked here appear here, right there. But instead of being stacked on top of each other, they are presented in the form of a network of nodes connected one to another. It's a bit of a complex concept to assimilate, especially if you've never dealt with nodes before, like you would have if you knew, for example, Nuke or Fusion, which are two different compositing softwares. And in Harmony, it has several purposes. Most importantly, it's used for puppet animation or for compositing, but it has some other uses. That, again, I'll cover much later. So, now that we've seen the most important windows in Harmony, let's look at the preferences and change one thing that will be really important later. So, you're going to go into Edit, Preferences, and up there in the General tab, we're going to change the default levels of undo. It's really simple. It's the number of Control-Z you can do. Like in any other software, Toonboom lets you go back one action at a time using Control-Z. By default, I think the value is around 50 or something. I put it at 500. It's largely enough. You can go beyond if you know that your machine can handle it, but 500 should be good. Note that I'll be coming back later to the preference window to change some other settings as we go along, but right now just change the level of undos. That's the most important right now. So that's it for this video. I know you probably feel like you didn't learn a lot, but I think it's better to give a quick tour of the software before digging into the interesting stuff. Join me next time as I introduce you to all the tools of vector drawing in Toonboom Harmony. Until then, take care.